Hey everyone, it's Sky from Arthritis to Athlete here, and here we go again. It's more craziness on the Joe Rogan podcast. If you guys remember, just about a month ago, Joe Rogan had a guy named Chris Kresser, who's an acupuncturist, on his podcast to talk about the game changers and the science behind it. And as you may know, lots of his claims range anywhere from slightly misleading to total utter nonsense.
Simple carbohydrates such as barley and legumes like beans.
I actually did an entire video debunking lots of Chris's claims on that podcast. I'll link that in the description down below. Anyway, so then James Wilkes, who is the director of the Game Changers, saw this podcast and requested that he be on the podcast so he can defend his film. And what do you know? Joe actually said, sure. So they had James and Chris on the podcast at the exact same time to duke it out. And needless to say, it was kind of uncomfortable to listen to. But even if James was a little bit more aggressive than I would have liked him to be, he still did a great job at defending his film and showing Chris's inadequacies when interpreting research. In fact, Joe was so impressed by James's performance on his podcast that he actually contemplated removing the original Chris Kresser podcast entirely. Pretty awesome, right? Sounds like Joe Rogan's actually starting to understand this stuff. He's starting to catch on. Well, not really. Not so fast. Recently on his podcast, he talked a bit more about the Game Changers, and surprise, surprise, it doesn't seem like his opinions were really that changed. And now, Joe's even going carnivore for the month of January. Yeah, crazy, right? Anyway, that's what this video is about. We're going to be responding to some of Joe and his guests' claims. Let's run right into it. Roll the intro.
I enjoyed that Game Changers with Chris Kresser, and it was a little bit like listening to a Protestant and a Catholic argue over the minutiae of how to worship God. It was very interesting in that sense, like how human beings get steeped in too much information, and then we'll start parsing out stuff that's not that helpful to the listener.
It's a long conversation.
All right, so I get his analogy, and this kind of stuff definitely does happen. But when it comes to James and Chris's debate, I would really argue that they're not debating minutia. Sure, it might seem like they're debating minutia on the surface, but underneath, it's actually much more than that. James is under the position that if you want to be optimally healthy, you should be only getting a few percentage points of your calories from animal products, and that you can be totally healthy, no problem, even if you're totally vegan. And James takes this position because it's backed up by the vast majority of scientific evidence and is considered the consensus. While on the other hand, Chris is advocating for most people to consume anywhere from 35% to 50% of calories from animal foods. That's not minutia, that's a huge difference. Hey, Aunt Patty, I'm starting to get real concerned about that smoking habit of yours.
Oh, don't be silly, Billy. I only smoke like 40% of the time I'm awake.
But Aunt Patty, that's still a lot of smoking, and you already had one heart attack.
Ugh, I told you 1,000 times, Billy. That's just because I was feeling really stressed that day.
Oh no! Oh my gosh! No, not again! But throughout the entire debate, you hear Chris say things like, oh, well, James, I'm with you almost 100%. I eat mostly plants too. And while that is true, he's painting it as if there's very little difference between what the two of them are talking about, when in reality, there's a quite big discrepancy there. A better comparison when it comes to religion, like Joe's guest is talking about here, would be like how certain Christian denominations go back and forth on whether you are saved by grace through faith or whether it's mostly a doing of your own works. I would say it's very clear that the Bible states that you were saved by grace through faith, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. My point is that this is not minutia they're talking about. This is more than that.
When Chris was talking about the Game Changers, he got several things wrong. The big ones were the amount of protein that you can get in peanut butter, the amount of protein that's in bread, and whether or not that is equal to 3 ounces of ground meat.
Right.
And what Wilkes was showing is that it is, and he made his point very well, and that made his argument not look very good.
That's a good point, Joe. You're absolutely right. Chris totally made up his own definitions of what he considered a fact. Now, like I always say, I don't disrespect Chris as a person, but whenever he starts talking nonsense like this, I think it's very fair that he gets corrected.
The problem with all this is he's just making Chris look bad, and he's not necessarily proving that a vegetarian or vegan diet's better for you.
Right. Hey, you're right, Joe, but guess what? That's because that's not what his film was about. The Game Changers was not about how a vegan or vegetarian diet is undeniably better for you. It's just not. What it is about is if you want to be optimally healthy, the vast majority of scientific evidence shows that you should be consuming a very small percentage of your calories from animal products. The biggest reason the film uses vegan athletes is because it seeks to dispel the myth that vegans either can't get enough protein, or they can't perform, or they can't do whatever, fill in the blank. And that's just patently false. The film is not about why a vegan diet is the best diet and there's no other good diet. It is really more about how way too many people eat way too much meat and continue to believe it's good for them, when in reality we should be making a drastic move in the other direction towards more plants. But it is worth pointing out that vegans are at a drastically lower risk of diabetes, heart disease, and certain types of cancers, as evidenced by the fact that a whole food vegan diet can help prevent and even reverse these diseases once they're already occurring. But that's just icing on the cake. Just some food for thought, you know?
But I kept going back to what Chris was saying, which was, hey, I believe in plants. I eat mostly plants. A little animal products, an easier way to get B1.
Yes, but that's the problem.
It's not going to kill you.
Now again, I already talked about this. Chris is certainly making it out to seem that a little bit of animal products on the side isn't going to hurt your diet. And guess what? From a scientific standpoint, he's pretty much right. We don't really have absolutely clear-cut data that 100% whole foods plant-based diet is going to be absolutely better than a 97% or 98% whole foods plant-based diet. But Chris here is saying one thing and then doing another. He's recommending anywhere from 35 to 50% of calories coming from animal products. That's not a little bit, that's a lot.
He's got enough stuff that he can say you were inaccurate with the criticism. Then we get lost in the argument. Like, is meat bad for you? Is it like...
And that's the main question.
It's not.
No.
Okay, I'm not going to get too deep into this one because it's such a rabbit hole of a topic and we could talk about it for ages. But Joe, consider how we have massive amounts of epidemiology showing that populations who eat large amounts of meat end up having worse health outcomes. And I know, everybody's gonna scream at me saying, but the Inuits, they eat large amounts of saturated fat and don't have any heart disease. Well, the problem with that is it's just likely not true. More recent investigations of Inuit mummies are actually showing that they absolutely had atherosclerosis, which is a telltale sign of heart disease. On top of epidemiology, we also have massive amounts of mechanistic data showing that meat could pose possible health threats. Heme iron, new 5-GC, heterocyclic amines, and the actual animal protein itself are some of the suspects. In fact, heme iron is one of the reasons that the WHO, which is the largest organization of health and nutrition professionals in the world, classified red and processed meats as a class 1 and 2 carcinogen. We also have randomized control trials of a whole food vegan diet reversing heart disease, reversing diabetes, and reversing prostate cancer. That can't be said with any other diet with the research we have currently. So Joe, I'm not going to argue with you about if meat is actually healthy or not. But at this point, with the massive amounts of research we have, we certainly can't call it a health food. And we also can't call it necessary or essential. All of those things would be disingenuous or wrong.
These studies where you connect people with all these diseases with meat, they connect their diet as a whole. They could be eating cheeseburgers and bread and soda and lifestyle and drinking and smoking, but they also eat meat. Versus people who don't eat meat.
You're right, Joe, that might be the case. We don't know, but it might. But you're failing to recognize that researchers are not stupid, and they adjust for these individual factors. I mean, do you really think that the WHO, the world's largest organization of health and nutrition professionals, classified red and processed meats as a class 1 and 2A carcinogen just from lackluster research? No, that doesn't happen. Whew. Okay, sorry if I'm getting a little heated, but gosh, this is just ridiculous. I hear this type of stuff all the time. I respect Joe, but I've got to call him out whenever he's spewing nonsense.
But you could also have a guy who comes in and goes, hey guys, here's the thing, man. Let's just look at cultures that live a long time and have vibrant, lives and good lives. Some of it is like, I'd like to look at the blue zones who eat meat and they a lot of times they eat some form of dairy and they drink and they have good communities. They don't retire. There's a lot more to longevity and health and living a good life than being a purist.
Okay, again, great point, but you're doing the same thing Chris did earlier, saying one thing and doing another. I'll show you what I mean. Let's actually take a look at one of the blue zones and what they were eating, the Okinawans from Japan. The Okinawan diet actually only consisted of about 4 to 5% of calories from animal products. If you're gonna use this as a justification as to why animal products are healthy, you better actually live by it, and you better actually be eating 4 to 5% of your calories from animal products. But I guarantee you, in fact, I know for a fact that that is not what Joe does. And it's definitely not like what 98% of developed nations do. Let me use this same argument in a different format to really clearly illustrate what I'm saying. We all know that alcohol is not a health food, and optimally, you shouldn't be consuming much of it at all. But I could look at the blue zones and say, hey, they drink a little bit of alcohol and they're really healthy. So thus, that totally justifies me drinking like 4 beers a day.
Oh my goodness, Bob. You've come home drunk every night this week. I mean, what is up with you?
Oh, honey, I swear to drunk I'm not God.
Then what is that in your hand?
Water?
That's not water, Bob. I can smell it.
You're right. You're smart.
Anyway, I think you get my point by now. I originally intended to respond to another video with this video, but I just don't have enough time for that. But let me know if you want me to respond to that too. It's a really interesting video about where Joe says he's doing the carnivore diet for the month of January. And let me just say, he says some interesting things. Anyway, if that sounds appealing to you in any way, let me know in the comments if you want to see that. Alright, and I think that's about gonna wrap things up. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, if you got any value out of this video, please consider adding value back to my channel by liking, commenting, and hitting that subscribe button, as well as the bell icon next to it. That helps my channel out a bunch. Alright, and with that, I will see you guys very, very soon, and God bless.